to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I am pumped to have Edward Egros on the show. He is a professor at California Lutheran University, and he is a football analytics and betting expert. Professor Egros, welcome to the show.
I am equally, if not more, pumped to be a part of the festivities here today. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. How's everything going?
Things are good. You know, I'm wondering real fast if I can ask a philosophical question. If we had a third person also named Ed or Edward on the program and all three of us did some kind of roundtable thing, would they have to go by Eddie just so that we could differentiate for audio purposes?
For audio purposes, for sure. I actually have a text thread in Ann Arbor where there's three Eds, and there's an Ed F and an Ed A and Ed H.
Jeez.
So there's many things that we could do, right? But Eddie, you know, people used to call me Eddie when I was a little kid.
No, that's not good. No. Unless you're in the hockey community, you cannot call me Eddie. That's a rule.
Well, we won't call you Eddie. We'll get another Ed to be Eddie.
Yeah, exactly. It's their fault. They're the last one coming out.
The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Rank Sports Betting Newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. I bring you tips from sharp people like Professor Edward Egros. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Edward, is there a football bet that you would be willing to share with us?
I think the best way to get things going here is by holding your nose, because I think this is that part of the season, especially in the NFL, where we have several weeks of data, several weeks of observations. We've certainly watched enough where we think we can reject our priors. We think we can move on to everything that we've seen, but I would slow the roll just a little bit. I think what we've seen may not be entirely indicative of what we're going to see the rest of the season, specifically when it comes to rookie quarterbacks. Now, if you look at, say, Caleb Williams, number 1 overall draft pick, he had one of the worst total QBRs in week 1, 28.5 to be exact, finishing quite far down on the overall starting quarterback list. But then you go to week 5, he was the leader at 83.9. So when you look at rookie quarterbacks, you cannot conclude that someone's going to be fantastic, or it's going to be some quick uptick, or they're going to be terrible, horrible, no good, very bad the rest of the season. Veteran quarterbacks, yes, they can enjoy that kind of variance as well, but for the most part, we know what we're going to get out of them. They are largely reliable and consistent one way or the other. But the dialogue about rookie quarterbacks after 5 weeks, I think, can be a little bit premature. Connor McQuiston, who I worked with at Next Gen Stats, one of the things that he looked at in his Substack is he looked at using a padding approach, and a lot of other really smart people use padding approaches as well when it comes to predicting consistency for the rest of a player's career. And what he concluded was that when it comes to a rookie quarterback, we need at least 9 to 10 games of data to determine what we should expect for the rest of their careers. Now, I've looked at other research, I've done and conducted other research, and to me, I think it's even longer than 9 to 10 games. But in terms of models and approaches I trust, 9 to 10 games is as conservative as I'm willing to go when it comes to concluding anything. So let's apply this to, say, Denver's Bo Nix. He's had some awesomely bad box score numbers in the early going of his career, such as, say, against New York. But, say, even in that game, the second half was a little bit more respectable. How he performed against Las Vegas was even more respectable than that. And while I understand that the Chargers do have a much improved defense, defensive numbers from one week to the next can be very well volatile based upon how well the quarterback is playing. I get Justin Herbert is still not 100% despite coming off of a bye, but it's possible Nix may be coming into his zone, certainly has a great offensive genius as his head coach in Sean Payton, and I do think it is possible that Nix can keep up with a game where the total is 35.5. To me, that's just awfully low to where I think we could see something that is a little bit more average. Not something that's a barn burner, but something that's a little bit more average where, heck, the Chargers could hang that number by themselves, or Denver could be able to keep up to where we see like a 21 to 16 kind of a ball game. Given these overall conditions, I think the over is quite a comfortable play here.
I'm seeing 35.5 in this game. So you like 35 over 35.5 in Chargers at Broncos on Sunday.
I do.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit more, because you mentioned with Caleb Williams that his performance in game 1 or 2 has been different from his performance last week, which may be because the Carolina Panthers can't play any defense. But
right.
So rookie quarterbacks, their performance can change, but then you also said that you need about 9 or 10 games. But what if they've kind of changed over, between games 1 through 4 versus 5 through 10, right? How do you kind of reconcile that?
For sure. It's something where it can go both ways, right? Like a rookie quarterback could have played a disastrous defense and then they go back to something that's more of an equilibrium going forward. That's absolutely possible. No doubt about that. At the same time, I think the bigger thing I'm looking for when it comes to evaluating rookie quarterbacks and figuring out what totals and spreads to take is we don't know as much as we think we do. And so if you're looking at, say, your overall bell curve and you're looking at, say, a total of 35.5, to me, I mean, it's a really low number for an NFL regular season game, right? Like, as far as I can tell, Justin Herbert is going to play. I think that's what the reports are saying. Certainly won't be 100% here. And there are 2 respectable defenses. But in the grand scheme of things in NFL regular season contests, 35.5 is an awfully low number. And also, when we're looking at league numbers when it comes to overall offense, I know the chatter has been, well, offense is down, whatever the case may be, but coaches are still going for it on 4th down at a reasonable clip. 4th and 1, 4th and 2, 4th and 3. So it seems to me like this is just variance that we're looking at. At some point, it will return. We're looking at lower red zone conversion numbers. At some point, that should bounce back. And I think all of these ideas of variance do apply to rookie quarterbacks as well, where it's harder to predict what they're going to do from one game to the next because game plans are changing. They're learning the offense. They're learning the nomenclature. You're dealing with, far thicker playbooks. And I do think that the outlook on Bo Nix is that, okay, he probably was drafted way too high, that Denver rushed to take him because they were nervous or whatever. And I don't think that those narratives are quite accurate in terms of what his capabilities may be. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be a fantastic quarterback for the rest of his career, but I am saying that given these conditions, this is an awfully low number. And something where, okay, receiving core for Denver may be a little banged up, but it could be serviceable. They may have enough wrinkles that they're going to break out for a division game like this one. And, we do believe in Justin Herbert. So overall, I just think that this is something that, could be a more average scoring kind of game.
Awesome. So you're really taking the number here. 35.5 is pretty low.
I think so.
Awesome. Let's move on into college football. Texas plays Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry. It's an important game for both teams, obviously. Texas is undefeated. Looks like a team that, most likely will make the college football playoff, at least based on what they've done so far with the big win over Michigan. Oklahoma, the offense has kind of been dreadful. They've benched the quarterback. What do you see in this game?
So funny that I feel like such a hypocrite whenever I was breaking this one down. I'm going, God, I'm going against my favorite axioms here. One of them being that if you like an underdog in college football, you might as well take them on the money line. Good work for the Vandy backers over there, by the way. Nicely done.
That's right.
Yeah. But it's something where specifically in this contest, I just don't see a way that Oklahoma can win. But I do think they can cover 14.5. I do think this can be a close game. But it is something where just because it's a close game doesn't necessarily mean that they can do just a little bit more and get over the hump. Like backdoor covers, things like that are very much in play in a game like this. Obviously, the big story is going to be Texas at quarterback. Quinn Ewers certainly is the more stable and reliable option, but the higher ceiling does belong to Arch Manning. I think we can all agree upon that conclusion that if, say, this were something where Oklahoma's defense was the absolute best in the world and say Ewers was still not quite 100%, then maybe you do need to increase the variance a little bit. But this is something where I think Quinn Ewers can certainly come in, and as long as he's healthy enough, he can win this football game, no doubt about it. But let's hypothesize, though, that he isn't 100% and he does struggle, and say some of the disguise coverages are really messing with his head. Well, Steve Sarkisian can switch quarterbacks. Just because Ewers is starting doesn't mean that he has to play the entire time. Now, we don't have examples of this necessarily, that Sarkisian is willing to make a switch at that position. But I do think he is a more than competent head coach to know that if things are going south, that he is willing to make this kind of a change. So I look at that and say, okay, at some point, someone is going to be successful at the quarterback position for Texas, so they should at least win the game in that regard. But then as we look at, say, who Texas has played, that might be, one big question mark, because the only tough game that they've had, quote unquote, is against Michigan in the Big House. Meanwhile, Oklahoma, some sneaky good special teams. They've had good starting field position for many of their contests. They have had a much tougher schedule, say against, decent teams like Tulane and Auburn. Of course, the marquee contest against Tennessee. PFF has Texas with the best pass blocking, so that clean pocket should help either quarterback, so either of them should be successful against what is a formidable Oklahoma defense. But I look at this and say, can Oklahoma's offense put together a couple of trick plays? Yeah, maybe. But I don't think it's going to be enough to be sustainable. But it could be something where they have enough points, they have enough explosives to at least keep this game relatively close. To me, 14.5 is just too much. I think the Sooners will cover.
Excellent. We will see what happens in that game. Edward, let's move on to an interesting game in my mind. I'm still not used to the fact that Ohio State at Oregon is a Big Ten game, but it is. I do feel like it is the marquee game of the weekend. Ohio State really hasn't played anyone, and this is a big test going on the road against another top 5 team. Oregon seems to have disappointed a little bit. You look at a 10-point win over Idaho, and that doesn't really impress you. What do you see in this game?
It would seem like a quarterback matchup between Dylan Gabriel and Will Howard should lead to a bunch of points. And I certainly understand that logic, but I like the under in this one. I think Oregon does not have the explosives that they did under Bo Nix. Red zone play has been a little bit inconsistent, probably opting for field goals a little bit more often than, say, you would expect having Dylan Gabriel as your gunslinger. And I know red zone play isn't predictive. They could, turn it around and then, go 4 for 4 with 4 touchdowns in the red zone. Certainly a possibility here. But at the same time, this offense is not the same as it was last year under Bo Nix. And there could be a lot of reasons for it. Certainly, Nix might be the better processor of information. I'm not sure I'm ready to make that conclusion yet, but it's certainly something I'm considering as far as theories go. And it is a complex offense that Oregon does run. And they do it to confuse defenses. They do it so that, say screenplays work and they've got a bunch of open space for their receivers, whatever the case may be. But I do think we can conclude that for the rest of the season, the offensive numbers for Oregon are going to be a good bit more modest. So there is that aspect. Meanwhile, Ohio State, they've been good rushing and passing, and they're facing an Oregon front that does not have fantastic rush defensive grades. And so at some point when Ohio State does get a lead here, I'm going to expect them to have a more conservative approach and probably run a little bit more often than they normally would, wind down the clock, make sure that they're getting the good matchups there. So I think the conservative approach by Ohio State and some question marks with Dylan Gabriel specifically leading this Oregon offense, I'm expecting fewer points, probably something closer to a total of 50. So I like the under overall.
There's a lot of 53.5 out there right now. I'm seeing it at DraftKings. Do you have a model that has a number, or is this just kind of a feel in terms of matchups and personnel?
I think the matchups and personnel probably scream a little bit louder in a situation like this. I mean, certainly you can look at things like rush rate over expected, which is model based to give you at least a clue as far as what kind of play calling we're supposed to expect here. But I also do think that when it comes to, overall approaches, like you are still, quasi in the middle of the season here, where you don't necessarily need to, empty the playbook, so to speak. You can still be, quasi-conservative because there are still tough games for both teams going forward. So I would not be surprised if, say, yes, we could see, say, a couple of explosives by both offenses, but definitely I think this is going to be more of a trench warfare kind of contest that I think Ohio State will win and control the clock with.
Excellent. Let us move on to the Heisman. It has been an interesting race so far because no one has really taken a hold of it. I believe Dylan Gabriel, the Oregon quarterback, was the favorite preseason, and your advice is to never bet the favorite, and that is looking pretty good. But give us a sense for the Heisman race and any Heisman bets that you might have.
I would like never bet on the Heisman favorite to be on my epitaph. Is that possible? Can I call that now? Because
you're a little too young to be thinking about your gravestone, but we'll keep that in mind for sure. I will
mark it down.
If I do happen to outlive you, which seems unlikely, but we will make sure that is in your legacy.
Thank you. I ask for so little, so I do appreciate the advance notice there. Yeah, Dylan Gabriel, you shouldn't have bet him in the first place, and I'm certainly not going to now with a longer number for all the reasons we talked about with the previous game. I am also grateful that the Heisman isn't won in September because I'm looking at those with the two shortest odds right now, and I am praying, hoping that my friends and countrymen aren't taking flyers on Ashton Genty and Travis Hunter right now. You're talking about a mid-major running back. He's great. Don't get me wrong. He's fantastic, and he could very well be fantastic for the rest of his football playing career. In fact, I'm expecting that. But for him to win the Heisman at a mid-major program with the position that he plays when everything is about passing and everything is about the playoff, no, do not do it with that number. That's absurd. And then also, too, and this is coming from, a Shohei Ohtani backer, for a variety of reasons. Two-way players, when we're talking about college football, yes, it's exciting. Yes, it's really cool. But you have a couple of things to keep in mind here. Number one, is he going to stay healthy for the rest of the season? When you're playing that many snaps, I'm going to naturally have questions if you're going to basically be out there for the rest of the season, that you're able to have the same kind of workload. We just don't see it. So there are going to be questions there. And if he doesn't, then has he done so much for the games that he has been out there for that he's undoubtedly the Heisman winner? To me, that's just not how it works. These things are won in November and to an extent December. So I look at it and go, we probably need to slow our roll, even though he's been super impressive as far as that's concerned. Another thing too is Colorado does need to be in contention for the playoff for Travis Hunter to be taken extra seriously. And I don't think they're there yet. Yes, they have exceeded expectations, but I don't think those expectations were that high to begin with for the Buffaloes. So that's going to be a big question. If Colorado is very much in contention to win the Big 12 and make the playoff that way, then yes, Travis Hunter should be taken seriously. But until that happens, I just can't take a flyer on him right now. Now, what I've talked about forever is quarterbacks for playoff contenders. That's usually a recipe for success here. Cam Ward, second highest total passing EPA behind Indiana's Curtis Rourke. He's 29th in total rushing EPA, so I think the Miami quarterback, even though it's not great value at plus 450 on FanDuel, it is the shortest favorite I would consider here. I think it's fine, and Miami is the best team in the ACC. I think SMU is probably second. Have to mention that, you know me. But I do think that Miami does have the opportunity to run away with the narrative when it comes to getting that ACC championship spot. So I think that's going to put Cam Ward in a great position. So plus 450, maybe that's worth a sprinkle. But if we're talking about a quarterback that isn't getting enough love, I think Jackson Dart at 16-1, still intriguing to me even now. Primetime opportunities to shine against LSU and Georgia. He's currently 5th in total passing EPA. Great infrastructure around him with head coach Lane Kiffin. I do think that Jackson Dart at 16-1 is probably the one I would like the most at this point.
I love that. I think that this Ole Miss team, they certainly stumbled against Kentucky, but got right back on the saddle last weekend. Against South Carolina, they easily covered 9.5 points, which was nice when that was a bet that you had. And, one thing that I like about Ole Miss is I do think they have a decent chance of making the playoff. Mm-hmm. The defense is excellent. They are either first or second or something like that. When I look at success rate allowed, adjusted for opponent, you did mention, that he does have Lane Kiffin there to help him with the offense. Like, I just think there's a lot of opportunities for him to, make the case. I think he is a pretty good quarterback. You are getting value at 16-1 right now. I do like that a lot. I'm going to bet that soon, maybe even before this podcast comes out.
There you go. I'll keep my answers longer so that you have some time to make sure that the bet slip is correct. The other thing, too, is, okay, if I come into a conversation and say, all right, I can guarantee that the Southeastern Conference will have 4 to 5 spots in this 12-team playoff. Who's going to make it? Well, Georgia obviously will be a part of that. Texas will obviously be a part of that. Alabama, probably. I know the Vandy loss hurt, but I still think that we have a lot of faith in Alabama. Ole Miss is probably number 4, number 5 on that list. And so I'm with you that playoff contention is certainly a viable option for them. And I think also if you're looking at like play action rates and things like that, I do think that voters are probably a little bit hesitant to look at strictly play action quarterbacks. But Dart's play action rate has dipped a little bit. And to me, I think that helps him in terms of overall reputation. It's still a large part of his game, as it should be, because play action passing is great. But I think it's something where we're not solely focusing on him to be able to do those kinds of things. And, screen game, all that other stuff. I do think that Dart is able to handle a wide variety of options. And it's hard not to like what his ceiling can be.
Do you really think voters are looking at play action rates? I feel like, voters want results, right? I don't necessarily get a sense that they care about how those results come about.
I think one of the reasons why I do think that maybe it's not a number that they look at, but I do think when they're watching film and they're looking at who is, developing offensive plays and things like that, I do wonder if, say, the Mac Jones deal that season when Devontae Smith won the Heisman, I do wonder if suddenly voters are opening themselves up to the idea that it's not just a quarterback who is part of a high-flying offense that should be considered, but also what is that quarterback doing? Certainly rushing would help the cause, but I also think, how are these things being developed? Like if you're throwing bombs all the time and say it's with wide open receivers, then recognizing, finding it, play design, all of that stuff, I do think all of these various elements do get incorporated into, say, the unconscious. But overall, I agree with you that maybe they're not looking at numbers per se, but I do think how these offenses are designed. I think at some point you watch enough of this stuff and you go, okay, that looks like, a great situation, like a Brock Purdy, for instance, versus, okay, this looks like a quarterback who's really running this offense. And sometimes it's sort of a lifetime achievement award, which Dart may very well earn.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do feel like this year is lacking kind of elite talent, right? I mean, it's not the past years where we had a Caleb Williams that was certainly going to be the first pick, CJ Stroud the year before that, who I certainly considered an elite talent. I think that's really, and Dylan Gabriel, I think, is a fine quarterback, but when he was the favorite at the beginning of the season, that certainly made me think that going towards players with longer odds might be the way to go.
Right.
And in terms of elite talent, the one guy that kind of really has jumped off the television screen to me is Avery Johnson of Kansas State. He's at 100-1. I'm just looking. Kansas State's 4-1 and 15th in my member college football rankings. This guy looks like Michael Vick to me out there, except that he's white and has long hair. But
other than
the way he
other than that,
but the way he runs, like the athleticism that he brings, is kind of astounding. He was kind of anointed the starter, I believe, and that's part of why Will Howard ended up transferring and going to Ohio State. And yeah, he's an interesting one to me. Have you thought about him at all, or anyone else with longer odds?
I have. In fact, I think Avery Johnson was someone I mentioned, when we were looking at preseason possibilities.
Yeah, you did. That's right.
Yeah. And I'm very high on him still.
At that point, I had not yet seen him play. But no one on Arizona had a prayer tackling him. I mean, it was almost comical. And yeah, in terms of, again, players that just kind of jump off the television screen, he's the one that really stands out to me. So yeah, maybe worth, and like they could make the playoff, playing some Big 12 games towards the end of the season, and then maybe he gets a chance to kind of showcase his skills in front of a huge national audience.
There does have to be another notch just because I think, yes, in terms of ceilings, Avery Johnson, his film, his highlight reel is about as good as anybody's, but he has also made some, say, unforced errors. And when you look at the entire body of work, I somewhat understand where his odds are. I still think you're finding value if you bet on him right away. I agree with that. But I do have that concern that he is a little bit younger and he is going up against more established names and more established programs. So there is a reason why the odds are a good bit longer. But I'm with you at the same time. Like if you're looking at his upper tier plays, I'd put those up against anybody's.
I just think he has an ability to wow people in a way that no one else ahead of him can.
Sure.
And I think that means something when you're talking about an award that is voted on by subjective sports writers, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it is, and that is an important thing to keep in mind. It is hard to quantify, I suppose, which is why I think team performance, will matter a great deal, and why say I'm not looking at say mid majors or Colorado or things like that. I think there has to be some sort of backing that. Okay, yeah, maybe he's inconsistent, but those highlights they led to wins, and that matters.
All these kids are inconsistent.
Yeah, right.
It's just a matter of whether they get dinged for it. So,
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, we could talk about that forever, but let's change subjects because let's go to the NFL. We do need to talk about Buffalo at the Jets on Monday Night Football. This game got a little spicier when Robert Saleh got fired on yesterday, I guess, Tuesday. Kind of a surprise. I do think it's an interesting game because Buffalo was great for a while and then has kind of struggled. The Jets, I don't know. I thought I saw some things in Aaron Rodgers that I really liked. I actually picked him up on my fantasy team. He has not really done that well since that happened. We have since dropped him. I do think he's an interesting player because I do think there is some of that old Aaron Rodgers there. But clearly the performance wasn't there in London against a pretty good Minnesota defense. Gets the head coach fired. Who knows who's pulling the strings there? But your thoughts on Monday night with Buffalo at the Jets?
It's fascinating that the Vikings defense basically is designed to confuse because you have basically everyone out of position and no one doing what they normally do traditionally. And that Aaron Rodgers, as smart as he is, could still be fooled in some cases or flummoxed, if nothing else. That to me was very intriguing to see that. So, for the master to be taken down a couple of notches was fascinating. But when it comes to Robert Saleh, I think in the short term, this will have zero impact in terms of how we should look at this game. He wasn't the defensive play caller. The offense was more about Aaron Rodgers and to a lesser extent, Nathaniel Hackett. Saleh was in more of a leadership role. And I don't necessarily think in the short term you lose that. I think the infrastructure is still there. It's going to be over time when we see, okay, was Saleh really involved if things go south, getting the train back on the tracks? I think that might be a bigger question going forward. And it is kind of funny because I hearken back to, say, my time when I was a hockey play-by-play announcer. There was this coach and he was my age, so, in college, so to speak. Whenever he would talk to his players, whenever they were misbehaving, he would always yell at them, "Hey, smarten up." And I'm like, is that really a word, smarten? And it turns out it is. So I'm the idiot for thinking that it wasn't. And what's interesting to me whenever I'm looking at the market for this game is I think the market smartened up to the Robert Saleh news. It was at Bills -3 at one point when it was at -2. And so I think some people were thinking, okay, this Robert Saleh news is a net negative, so you better go ahead and back Buffalo. But then it started to inch back to -2. And to me, I was waiting for that opportunity to send it back the other way because I think in general, we overreact to coaching news. If a head coach is going to be on the sideline because of whatever reason, injury or something, I do think we overreact to that news because often these things are already set in stone prior to practices. Yes, they matter for the long term, but for a one-game situation where maybe we were kind of expecting it anyway, I would try and find your edges elsewhere. Honestly, I think the market is doing exactly what it should have done. I want to see who they bring in to assist in the offense. because that may lead to bigger differences and better leadership. That's when I may start tailing the Jets, because suddenly they're going to start having a better game plan in general. But as far as the Robert Saleh news, I don't think there's really an edge to be had there. And I think if you're looking for a side to play, I would look for something else.
Professor Edward Egros, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find your good work.
I am on the socials, on X and Instagram and all sorts of fun stuff at Ed with Sports, at Ed with Sports. Also dropping a lot of great content from Bally Sports West as we preview the LA Kings season. Clippers are going to be here before you know it. And also some great stuff recapping the LA Angels season. Certainly some young stars to look forward to. I know it was a tough season, but there are reasons to have at least a little bit of optimism for 2025. So please make sure to check those out.
Edward, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting newsletter. You will get 5 Nuggets Saturday, my curated list of tips and analytics where I highlight the thoughts of sharp people like Professor Edward Egros. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. The 60-minute guide to the 2024 football season is my audiobook that contains 2 deep dive stories that apply analytics to football betting. If you dig in, you can see how my prediction on Tennessee quarterback Will Levis is doing. You may be able to listen on Spotify for no additional charge. If you're listening to this podcast on Spotify, click on the podcast icon in the top left corner. It's black and yellow. And then when you get to my podcast, you can click on More Like This. The 60-minute guide to the 2024 football season will appear under host recommendations. Once again, my name is Ed Fang. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again next week.